Stories bigger than Texas, the Alamo podcast. Calling all Alamo enthusiasts, it is your chance to be a part of history by donating your cherished Alamo memorabilia to the upcoming Visitor Center and Museum. Today we reveal our latest initiative, Treasures of the Alamo, a call for memorabilia. The kinds of items the Alamo is looking for, the best way for you to tell us about them, and how the Alamo plans to take this memorabilia from around the world to showcase how and why we remember the Alamo. I'm your host, Emily Balcom. We're joined by Dr. Tyler Taylor, the Alamo's Vice President of Collections, Curations, Conservation, and Archaeology, as well as Nathan Jones, the Alamo's Director of Curation. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
We're talking today about Treasures of the Alamo, a call for memorabilia. This is a unique ask of our followers because we're asking for memorabilia, not artifacts, to serve a different purpose in the future Visitor Center and Museum. What is that purpose?
First, I just want to go in and clarify that memorabilia are artifacts to us. We're going to treat these the same way that we treat our permanent collection. But the idea is that this material is sites of memory. In the same way that you bring back souvenirs, etc., they're telling a story about the popular history of the Alamo and how it has meant different things to different people over time.
And we do want to reassure people, you made that note about what artifacts means, but those historic artifacts you expect to see in a world-class museum, that will be in the Visitor Center and Museum. But what makes the Alamo different from other historic sites is really that pop culture aspect.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I view it as we're telling really two histories here. We have the 300-year history from indigenous peoples to the mission, to the battle, to the army, to the present. And we also have the history of the memory of the site and how people have remembered the Alamo over time. 7 out of 8 galleries in the museum are going to be very devoted to that history of the first type. And the memory of the site is this popular culture gallery, and this call of artifacts is really about addressing that.
Part of the reason why we wanted to do a public call for memorabilia, which is something that we haven't done for more of our historic artifacts, things that are more 1800s or maybe battle-centric or before, is because a lot of this history and a lot of this memory is still living with the people for whom it matters. And part of curation is deciding what's important and what should go on display and what items are going to tell the story. And by asking the people to submit what they find important, what they want to see in this museum, is really going to help us make those curatorial decisions of how the story is going to be told. So we're hoping that by looking for artifacts, by engaging with the public in this way, that we don't only gain wonderful things to put in the museum, but we gain their knowledge and their experience and learn why they're passionate about these things they care so much about.
Because so often it comes from things that they did in childhood, whether they watched a TV show, a movie, whether they listened to music that had to do with the Alamo.
Exactly. What we're dealing with memorabilia of the Alamo is deeply, deeply personal in many, many ways. And so we really want the museum to reflect that.
When we say memorabilia, we could be talking about all kinds of things. Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Lunch boxes, toys, thermoses, movie posters, souvenirs brought from the Alamo gift shop early on, or little projects that you do in your home to commemorate the Alamo in some way, because we know in the state of Texas that happens.
We've even heard of a bedroom set, for example, that had to do with the Alamo.
Right. In the 1950s, there's this big Davy Crockett and Alamo craze between the Fess Parker series and the John Wayne film. And so the amount of just mass-produced Alamo stuff is astounding. And yes, you can get a full child's bedroom set.
And we have an emphasis in this call for memorabilia on a more modern era after 1945. Why is that?
So one of the big challenges when you get into modern artifacts is they don't intrinsically tell a story that's personal. These are mass-produced items. They're things that people pick up at a store, throw away in a trash can usually. They're designed to have a short lifespan. So in doing a public call and trying to get the public to give us their stories, what's really important, we're sitting around a table, we all have notebooks. Those notebooks, if donated to a museum without a story, that's not a very compelling artifact. But if you find out that someone was writing love letters with their potential spouse or something with this notebook, and you can add that layer to the interpretation, it suddenly takes something that is this mass-produced sign of our time cultural thing and makes it a really good touch point So when looking at toys and that, yes, they bring up nostalgia and childhood, but if we know that this specific child had this specific toy and it meant something about a connection to a grandparent or whatever else it was, that really helps guests and visitors make those connections to the past and show how things from the 1950s are still relevant today.
And not every historic site has memorabilia like this. Maybe the White House, the U.S. Capitol, the Grand Canyon. But when you go back and you think about battle sites, the Alamo is unique in this respect.
Unique in that respect also because it's just taken on a life of its own. We've mentioned already so many different cultural icons who have had an impact on the Alamo story and how it's told. Fess Parker, John Wayne are the two obvious ones that come to mind. But the Alamo story, it's global. We find Alamo memorabilia and Alamo-related artifacts from this era that are produced and consumed all around the world. They really demonstrate how different people not only view the story differently or understand it differently or have heard it in a different way or have seen it in a different context, but we see how people take images and the iconography and ideas about the Alamo and use them to express something about themselves and their own culture. So we talk a lot about how so many elements of the Alamo story are sort of universally understood things. You know, you hear the comparison to Thermopylae very, very often, sort of the idea of the last stand. And there are so many just of these abstract concepts that are connected to the Alamo story that people identify with. And then you see these pop cultural things, comic books, songs, movies. When you look at the context in which those are produced and in which people enjoy them all around the world, you learn a little bit more about, you know, what's going on in that corner of the world. Why are people in Germany? Why are people in Italy? Why are people in Japan so drawn to this Alamo story? And you get to learn something more about those places and them through the connections that they've drawn to the Alamo.
Speaking of Italy, you did a lot of research on that in your education, and that has circled back through this memorabilia drive. Can you describe that for us?
Yes, I did my dissertation research partly on images of the American West in Italian post-World War II comic books. And recently we had a donation of a little Alamo toys from Italy that were related to those comic books that I studied in grad school, spent hours and hours looking through them and translating them. And it was a really big full circle moment for me to see how all of these far-flung things that I have studied all come back, not just to where I am now, but to me in my hometown and seeing it all come together. And that artifact, I'm hoping, will be displayed in the museum. I'll make sure of it.
Okay, so say I've got an Alamo movie poster on the wall. How do I let your team know about it?
So first you go to our website.
thealamo.org/treasures.
Right. So there'll be a simple form there. Go ahead and fill that out. And that's going to send me an email. I check those weekly and I organize them, and then I try to respond once a week.
You can do it now through October 24th. You just submit basic information right now, your name, your email address, your phone number, a description of the item, and there's even a place where you can upload a photo, and that helps you tremendously.
Very much so. The photo will help us figure out what exactly it is you're talking about, because there are so many ways to describe Davy Crockett and Davy Crockett toys. And it's like, oh, it's this one. We have 20. Oh, it's this one. We've never seen it before. That's so exciting.
For sure. So what happens next with the review process, and how soon people can expect to hear from the Alamo?
So we have quick internal discussions about things that pop up. And I'll get back to someone within a week, probably asking for more information. There's paperwork to assign this as a gift, because this is going to become part of the Alamo's permanent collection, which means we take that very seriously.
Submitting your item to the Alamo through this form does not guarantee it will be included in the new museum. That is some of the fine print we have to talk about, but we still want to see it.
Absolutely.
Show us. Don't be afraid.
Absolutely. And I think the other important thing to note is that just because it's submitted and accepted, it might not be on display in the final visitor center museum. It might be used as a rotation object, so we'll have to change things over time in the visitor center. We also have a temporary exhibition program. Objects are going to be used for research, for other displays, and throughout the site. And that's a guarantee that they will be used.
Can you give us some examples of what's been submitted so far?
So one of my favorite is a man named David Crockett, who was on a television show in the 1950s about having the same name as a famous person. Has kind of this life-built scrapbook of all his David Crockett things. And he submitted a 3-foot tall cookie jar, which is David
Wow.
Crockett's face.
And he
so
really grew up in the right time.
He did. He did. So that one's very exciting to see.
This is an opportunity for the Alamo to not just get the item, but also get the story behind the item. Why is that so important from a curation standpoint?
But again, it's that idea that having the stuff is only really part of the story. If we don't know how it was used, who made it, where it was given, how it passed down to get here, one, we don't know for sure what it is, but also, again, you can tell a much more personal story if you get a full story and a full personal account with an object. It takes it from being kind of a background artifact in a case to being able to be the focus of something, the more information you have, because you can really just dive in and help people understand both the cultural importance of whatever it is and also find ways to connect it to themselves, to their present, and to whatever moments they're having.
And I know this doesn't sound super exciting, but for keeping collections records, so records of all of the things that we have in the Alamo collection, one thing that we think about is that 100 years from now, these items are still going to be in this collection, but 100 years from now, the people working at the Alamo won't have the context and knowledge that we have. So if we can get those personal stories and those really heartfelt explanations of why something is important today and put that in our records, then those can live on with the artifacts.
And that goes to a term that you two deal with every day, provenance. What is provenance and why is it important even for a Davy Crockett bedroom set?
Provenance is basically the record of ownership from an object's creation, and it helps us know that the thing that we're presenting is the thing we say we are presenting. It gets more important the further back you go, just because handmade artifacts are a lot harder to trace that. With industrial material like Davy Crockett bedroom set, you can pretty quickly tell if it's made 30 years later in China or if this is the 1950s from looking at materials, et cetera. But again, the provenance for this is much more about what Tyler's talking about, being able to talk about the cultural importance in those moments. For many of us, the 1950s and 60s is still present. Like I remember watching the Fess Parker Davy Crockett growing up, even though I'm not that old. In another 20 to 30 years, it's going to be much harder for people to place themselves in that cultural moment. So the more information we have, the more capable this site will be to tell that story in perpetuity.
And I bet when you were watching it, you had no idea you'd be working at the Alamo one day and helping tell the story of those moments in pop culture.
Absolutely not.
That's so fun, such full circle. Perhaps the most coveted pop culture item in the Alamo's own collection is John Wayne's coonskin cap from the 1960 movie The Alamo. As we've talked about on the podcast, pop culture is how so many people get into the Alamo story, like you, Nathan, and then start digging in to the history. It's an entry point.
And I think what's really interesting to me, I come from a Western history background, and really the story of the American West and the Alamo is one of those central stories to that. It's about the legends, and it's about telling a story that it's not necessarily totally based in fact. It's based in the cultural needs of the time and how that changes over time. One of my favorite just Alamo things is Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. He has a whole section on Goliad. It's first published in 1855, but he's writing it in the 40s during the Mexican-American War, and it's all about manifest destiny and the expansion of the United States and how these deaths at Goliad matter. But his reference to the Alamo is, I'm not going to talk about the Alamo. And I just find that really interesting. We have a spoon in the collection from 1890, and it's the DRT's formation. They're selling these spoons to help conserve the church. And you look at the list of names that's on the spoon, and it's Travis, Bowie, and then Bonham. Crockett is further down the list, and today when you think about kind of the trinity of the Alamo, it's going to be Bowie, Travis, and Crockett. And just thinking about how that changes over time and how the myth kind of morphs to meet the needs of the culture in the moment. And so that's one of the reasons I think interpreting and presenting popular culture is so important, because it helps you get an honest viewpoint of how people think and how they're approaching just more obliquely than standard letters and other historical documents do.
Let's fast forward to 2027. The Visitor Center and Museum is open. People are walking through the final gallery, the Pop Culture Gallery. What do you envision? What do you hope people take away?
One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot with the Pop Culture Gallery is how are we going to reach younger generations? We know how important these stories are to the generations who grew up with Fess Parker on TV. But I want to make sure that all ages who walk through the Pop Culture Gallery understand what a phenom the Alamo was. I'm going to date myself with my references, but it's like Pokemon. It's like Marvel. It's like these huge cultural phenomenons, things that have gone viral today. That's what it was like. You could walk into a little kid's bedroom and it would be decked out head to toe in Alamo, Davy Crockett. It was a huge, big cultural deal. And I think that having younger generations understand just how much meaning, all people understand how much, Harry Potter craze is, what meaning that has to your identity and how that forms who you are as a person. And I think that people should get a sense in that gallery that there are generations for whom the Alamo story was that part of their cultural identity formation.
We've talked about them on this podcast. Phil Collins, his first public performance singing was when he was a little boy, The Ballad of Davy Crockett. We've talked with David Zucker, the filmmaker behind classic films like Airplane and Naked Gun, who grew up watching these TV shows. It has filtered down into pop culture we still enjoy today.
It's everywhere. If you would like to start noticing the Alamo everywhere, come spend about 10 minutes with us on site, and then it will never leave you. Everything you see all around you, you'll be like, hey, Alamo, there's the Alamo, there's the Alamo. It happens real quick, and you see it everywhere. It's really fun if you're someone who works here.
Dr. Tyler Taylor, Nathan Jones, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Be sure to check out the podcast notes. We've linked to how you can donate your memorabilia now through October 24th. We know people from all over the world listen to the podcast. We see the stats, and we are truly looking forward to seeing what you submit from your collections. You've been listening to Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo Podcast.